Love often takes unexpected twists and turns, but that just makes the story more interesting.
My eye caught her, and that was it.
Oh my goodness, I think I'm falling in love with this boy.
I told my husband, if you marry me, you're going to laugh for the rest of your life.
Join us as we continue to bring to life the Canadian love stories of romance, family, friends, and community.
Well, love is the most important thing.
So when I finally did recover from Lyme disease, I thought, I'm going to try to turn this terrible thing on its head and turn something negative into a positive for readers. You know, if somebody like Janice can have this really bad illness that really rocked her whole world, and she can try to find some light in there and try to spread kindness, then maybe that inspires the next person to try to do the same.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Canadian Love Map podcast. We've got a fun one for you today, particularly fun for me, and I really hope it's going to be inspiring for you, because my guest today is a friend of mine, who I worked with for a long time. Do you understand how much we worked together?
Well, when we were chatting before, I was like, oh my goodness, like you guys go way back.
I was hired at ATV, which is now CTV Atlantic, when I was 22, although didn't want to mention how young I was then. And Janice was about that age. She was a reporter. I was a host and reporter.
Her talks about little things making a big difference really touched me, and I think it's going to touch our viewers as well.
That's what the book is. It's how little things can make a big difference, but it's also this beautiful message of how important kindness is in the world. And I think that's pretty powerful right now.
And very relevant, for sure.
Right on. Here we go. Janice Landry. Janice Landry, welcome to the Canadian Love Map podcast.
I'm already laughing, and I absolutely love it. You know what? We need love, we need laughter, we need connection, we need community, and I'm grateful to be here.
You know what? I have been thinking so much about your book. This podcast is about love, but when you really think it's about it, it's how love and kindness spark joy within people. So it's really about the joy. And reading your book, Every Little Thing, really made me think constantly of how kindness sparks joy. And in a world that feels heavy, that is just giving us so much lightness. Every little act of kindness we see somehow counters the big picture.
I mean, it can feel really, especially these days, very weighty. And I was saying to a few friends, I'm tired of living in unprecedented times. Wouldn't it be nice to live in precedented times, so to speak? So yeah, you're right. During what we're going through now collectively as a society, it just feels like we've had these waves and waves of things that have come at us. And so what I'm trying to do with Every Little Thing is show people that, acts of kindness and connection and helping people, it doesn't have to cost anything. You can just use your imagination. So for an example, there is a chapter in the book with a young man that used to be a former student of mine from Mount St. Vincent University. And he and his partner have been together for many years. And they're adult, grown, serious men. And they still do things like, put little notes in each other's lunches.
I love that.
I do too. And it made me really made me smile from the inside when he told that story, because I thought, especially for couples or people who've been together for a long time, hearing that is very inspiring, because it costs you absolutely nothing but thinking of the act, right, and then following through. So our late friend Audrey Parker, for example, used to say, when people show you who they are, believe them. And she was absolutely bang on. And it's really easy to have a lot of lip flap and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But it's the following through in the simple act of kindness. I can think about it. I should probably make some cookies for my friend or neighbor or whoever. And it's nice to think that, but you then actually have to take the time and do it. And that's where the joy really comes in the act of the doing.
And it then really is a gift of love.
The love that we're talking about isn't necessarily from person to person. You can show love to nature, animals, various other social justice issues. We don't want to shame people into thinking, well, I don't have a partner or a better half, so therefore I can't have love or joy in my life. There's all kinds of ways to spread love and joy, and you pick something that's important to you. Another part of the book, we talk about little wins and micro moments that, to really ground yourself to look for those can be very, very healing and resiliency building.
So this is your 7th book.
It is.
I love the quote that you use in the book, which goes like this: "It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good." And then what's needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding more, continuing. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. Boy, it feels, the world to many people feels like a gale right now. So let's talk about the argument for kindness. Why this book now?
The quote, first of all, I saw our former colleague from CTV, Paula Romano, who is a writer and educator and longtime veteran of broadcasting, really, really smart lady. She shared that quote, and I saw it on her social media last year when I had already done the draft for Every Little Thing, and I saw that quote, and I went, whoa, that is exactly what I'm talking about, a group of people that come together and they just do good. They spread joy, they spread light. And you don't know when you do a little act of kindness what the ripple effect of that will be. And there are, and that's discussed in the book by not just people like me, but people that really study this stuff. There are ripple effects and the reciprocity factor of giving and helping. When, let's say, for example, in Nova Scotia, we had some horrific things like fires and floods. And there were many people listening that can relate to, someone helped me when my house was flooded or there was a fire, and therefore I am going to help. Now, that doesn't mean I'm helping you necessarily, the person who helped me. I may decide 5 years from now to go out and do good, to help in some small way.
The pay it forward factor.
The pay it forward factor is absolutely what they're talking about as reciprocity. So I believe that it does take a group of people. Right now we're going through a really hard time as a society. But, the helpers always come out of the woodwork, don't they? And
even more so then, yes.
They do.
Exactly.
It's like a big call to action. It's like, yeah, you got to go home, and some days we will feel like eating a carton of ice cream or whatever we have to do, and do it. It's okay to not feel strong all the time, and that message is also in the book. But generally, those people regroup and go, you know what, I'm gonna do whatever I can. The heck with those people. And I think this group of people that just won't be swayed from trying to spread light, they do make a huge difference. And if you go around and you choose joy, which one of the guests in the book, Michelle Mahoney, who's the accessibility officer from King's, talks about getting up every day and choosing this. Mm-hmm. And she's had a really, really tough go over the years, and her chapter is absolutely incredible. And, if someone like Michelle Mahoney, who grew up with a really, really difficult path through her medical history, can choose light and joy and help people, then, that's an inspiration for the rest of us to be part of that critical mass that tips it forward.
She's incredible. And I've known her even longer than I've known you.
Yeah, isn't she a gift?
Yes. And she was born with some serious physical challenges, has had many, many surgeries through the years. But she just says, you know what, I can do everything anyone else can do. It's just going to take me longer.
That's right.
And as you say, she is out there making a difference for others by sort of smoothing the pathway for people with disabilities.
Yeah, and I think the thing that Michelle, when you meet her, she exudes kindness. I mean, she is kind of like this book personified for me. She talks about hand-holding, which is really interesting. The theme of hand-holding, there's literal hand holding in the book and figurative. And hers is figurative, of how she helps people living with disabilities who are in the King's environment and also in the community by being on the board of Easter Seals Canada, that she does whatever she can to help people in any way. And with, it can be emails showing them around campus, whatever that is, because she lacked that in her own life. And I think that's a really important message that, that people really need to hear. Not everyone has had their helpers and their backers. And someone like a Michelle, and this is also another big theme, lots of big themes in a little book, is that it's okay if you've lacked your own helpers in your life. It's never too late to become one. And that's exactly Michelle's story. And the act of helping and acts of kindness can be healing, according to mental health experts, for the person doing the act and receiving the act. And Michelle is constantly doing this for people by hand-holding figuratively that she did not have as a young person growing up.
I love that point that you make, and it comes through very clearly in the book that the receiver, obviously gets joy or appreciation, gratitude out of something that's done for them. But the person who is doing that form of kindness, whatever it may be, is actually also benefiting in a real way, psychologically, emotionally.
Yeah, it's true. And for example, there's a lady in the book who helped in the aftermath of the fires in Tantallon. And she's a military veteran, and she had deployed in her career to Afghanistan, which was a difficult deployment, but she helps on the ground with Team Rubicon Canada. And when we here in Nova Scotia had the fires, Team Rubicon came in and helped homeowners sift through the ashes of their homes to find whatever they could in the rubble as they sort of move forward. And her name is Jane, and Jane discusses in the book that as a veteran of Afghanistan, deploying in Team Rubicon Canada with fellow like-minded helpers has really, helped her as a helper to heal from some of the trauma that she's had in her own life. So she's a beautiful example of how you as a helper, even if you've had trauma or not had helpers, that when you give of yourself to other people, no, we don't do acts of kindness to get good karma. That's not what we're talking about, but it's very, very resilience building, self-esteem building to help other people. Sure, you feel good about it. It's a good thing, and it's okay. You can, when you drop a special treat to somebody's doorstep, right? Like I've had a friend of mine, an older lady, who's made me a tray of these pineapple squares that I absolutely love. And for no reason whatsoever, one day she brought me over a whole tray of pineapple squares, and I ate every goddamn last one of them, just so you know. Pardon my language, but I did. And I loved it, and every bite of that tray of pineapple squares was filled with joy. I mean, I loved them, but she went and bought all the stuff at the grocery store. She had that thought, but she followed through. It's good to have the thoughts, but we have to have actions that follow through, and it can be a little thing. Like there's a guy in the book who drops off one muffin on a doorstep because it's the person's favorite muffin, and he's thinking of them. One muffin makes a difference.
So does one book.
Yes, thank you.
And you have written this book about kindness. You might have just had the idea. What made you put it into action?
Well, it was really not something so beautiful that helped me put it into action. But in 2023, I became very sick, and I didn't know that I had been bitten by a tick. And that's why the theme of small and large runs through the whole book, because I realized that after I developed Lyme disease from the tick, it was a small thing, a black-legged tick, that had really radically changed my whole life and turned it upside down. So when I finally did recover from Lyme disease, which took a number of weeks and months, it was very bad, I thought, I'm going to try to turn this terrible thing on its head and turn something negative into a positive for readers. So not because I'm anybody special, I'm just another person, but if somebody like Janice can have this really bad illness that really rocked her whole world, and she can try to find some light in there and try to spread kindness, then maybe that inspires the next person to try to do the same. So this book is a gift. It's a gift for my husband and daughter, Rob and Laura, because they were there for me rather, in big and small ways when I was at my sickest. And when I say I was sick, Nancy, I was debilitated to the point where, as I write in the book, which was hard to discuss, but I thought it was important, that there were days that I couldn't wash my face and brush my teeth one after the other because of debilitating fatigue. And I am not exaggerating. It was really, I couldn't write, I couldn't work, I couldn't watch television, I couldn't really do anything because your joints and your brain and everything is just too overstimulated. It hurts. So it was just sort of fading day in and day out. It was just absolutely horrific.
As hard as it may be for you to talk about that, and it requires vulnerability, I want to say that I think it's a really important reminder, and this is like a little PSA in the middle of the podcast, but a tiny little tick that you may not be aware is on you can cause that kind of a health issue. And so if anybody's going out into the woods, going out into long grass, anywhere where you might get a tick picked up that has hopped off a deer and is waiting for you, make sure, one of the things they say is so good is as soon as you've been out for a hike, come home, get in the shower.
When I tell you I was really sick, people will read it. You can read the book to see how bad it really was. Lyme disease, as I said, is no joke. And there are people listening that either have it, are going through it, or have a loved one. And the tough thing about it is I had rashes. So there's a couple types of rashes you can get with Lyme, and one is like a typical bullseye. I didn't have that. Mine were these sort of oblong, maroon-colored rashes, which were literally over half of my body. It was terrifying. But they were a godsend. And this is weird, these whole silver linings. I'm actually happy I had them because it was the telltale sign when I went to the doctor and took my top off for examination. She looked at me and went, "Yeah, you have Lyme." I'll never forget that day as long as I live because you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was just flabbergasted.
I want to take you back because it's always interesting to me to see someone write a book and you can look at it from a distance and go, wow, everything they've done in their lives has prepared them for that. It's like you've been knitting this with every stitch of your life every day. I want to ask you to take me back to your childhood and give me an example of how time with your parents and your dad in particular led you to this book about kindness.
Well, and it's funny, I think really things come out when they're ready to be received. Mm-hmm. So, there are things in the book that I've known about my whole life, but they didn't really make sense and click in the bigger puzzle of my life till maybe Lyme. But I thought about when I was a kid, who was really there for me, and my dad and I were super duper close, Basil Landry. And every night when I went to bed, my dad would be the person who would tuck me in and tell me bedtime stories, which is really so important to do for children. And he was a very creative person, very serious person as a firefighter, but he had a really lovely, funny, creative, whimsical side that, some people may or may not have known. And every night he would tell me bedtime stories, and there were some that were made from his imagination. The important thing is I remember how the stories started. I would have been like under double digits, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I can remember that. I'm 60 years old. So it was just so lovely that he did that for me, and he read from picture books to me. And my favorite children's author of all time was the late Richard Scarry, who created this fantastical, whimsical world called Busy Town with all these little animal characters, and my favorite character of all time was Lowly Worm, which is this little worm with this Tyrolean hat with the feather and like one boot, and this tiny little creature. That's part of the book, is how can a tiny little creature like a worm spur this writer on? But really, I've loved those characters since I was a kid. And it was my dad introducing me to using your imagination and the joy of helping and connection that was in those books that's still relevant today.
You made me think of that book differently than I ever have before. It was a staple. Reading the way you described it made me sort of lock into the idea that, yes, it was about how busy the town was and all the different professions and characters in the town, but they all had time to be kind and thoughtful. And so there was a real sense of presence in the busyness now that I look at it with this lens from, this age.
That's right. I mean, the whole point is, and, I was lucky enough to do a big exclusive interview with Richard's only child, Huck Scary, who's in Gstaad, Switzerland, and their home base in Switzerland, and they have a long, long time.
And I love the name. I have to interrupt because people who knew the book will remember that Huck or Huckle
Yes.
is the main character, along with Loli, the cat, Huckle the cat.
That's right. Huckle the cat is Richard Scary's son, Huck Scary. And I did an interview with Huck, and it was, to me, and I've interviewed a lot of people like you, is one of the top. I mean, it's just way, way up there because nothing I do today, it all stems from being a kid listening to those stories. And as you said, it's so important to hear that this guy who wrote these books decades ago knew how important this was, that yes, all the residents of Busy Town are busy, but they're not too busy to help one another. Mm-hmm. And isn't that is a message we absolutely need to hear today, so that you're able to, as a creator and a graphic designer and artist and writer, do this. And then decades later, and by the way, has sold 100 million copies of his books.
Not bad.
I think he has. It's okay. It's all right. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. But the ability to connect with the reader, both the adult and the child, the brilliance lies in that. These books are for children and adults.
We couldn't share the great stories that we do here on the Canadian Love Map podcast without the amazing support of Charm Diamond Centres. They are Canada's largest family-owned jeweler, and they're proud to be putting love on the map. The folks at Charm Diamond Centres are thrilled to be a part of your love story. So visit charmdiamondcenters.com or one of your local stores. Love starts here. There are so many lovely stories of kindness, different forms in your book. One that really hit me in the heart was about knitting. I think about how little stitches that doing, not stitches, they're called.
Yeah, I know, knit one, purl two, and I'm not
exactly.
a knitter.
You can tell I'm a sewer, not a knitter.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I love the story about knitting and how little, bits of yarn can become a huge act of kindness. Please tell that story.
So there's a gentleman in the book, his name's Robbie, he's in Toronto, and he's part of this group, which is international and it has Canadian finishers. It's called the Loose Ends Project. And I happened to see this group on Instagram, and I thought, my mom used to be a knitter, and it's all these little tiny stitches or pieces that come together to make something really big and special. And I thought, this really is on theme with what I'm doing. So I reached out to them, and the two founders are in the United States. And they're like, yes, we have Canadian finishers, and we'll get you in contact with this guy. And his name, again, with Robbie, he finished these projects for his friend Sandra, who passed away. And she was an avid knitter. Both of them were very, very good craftspeople. They were like at the professional artisan level. And when she was dying, she had 12 items that she wanted to give to her closest friends, and she passed before they were completed. So she asked Robbie, she had a little list, and they went over it, as you do when you're very sick, as our friend also did, Audrey. And she had things she wanted to get done, her to-do list. And these to-do lists for people who are very sick, as our listeners will know, are very important. Mm-hmm. You're trying to wrap up these loose ends, the Loose Ends Project. And so Robbie completed, after his friend Sandra died, these 12 items, and he went to her memorial celebration of life and hand-delivered these items to people who had no idea that Sandra had started them, and he finished them. And look, I've got goosebumps thinking about this. And he said the amount of tears in that celebration of life when he went up to someone and said, "This is from Sandra. She wanted you to have it, and I have finished it for you." He's like, he just could hardly get through the story. But even topping that story is one that he told me at the end of his chapter, where he got sent as a finisher with the Loose Ends Project a a sweater that an elderly woman had started for her husband, and she had passed before she had completed the sweater, and it was left mid-row. So my mom, I grew up in a household with a knitter. You do get to the end before you lay the project down. But unfortunately, this woman's health had declined obviously quickly enough that she either was rushed to hospital or was unable to finish mid-row. So it was like kind of hanging precariously off these two knitting needles. And then when Robbie got the project and he opened the box and he went, oh, like it just hit him like it just shows you how precarious the nature of the actual knitting project was, like almost an allegory to life. Like it's just so fragile.
I was going to say it's just a bit of powerful symbolism to say we never know what
Exactly.
row we're going to be in the middle of when we leave.
And so he went on to finish the sweater, and I don't want to blow the story, but it's just so beautiful. And the elderly man does get his wife's sweater, and Robbie worked with the daughter, the woman's daughter, to make sure that the project was finished. But the recounting of these simple acts of kindness, like knitting something. You know, sometimes when we're at home and we think, well, what can I do? It's just so heavy out there. And, you know, Robbie said, you know, I can be on the train going into work. I can be watching a movie. I can be completing these projects and adding this into my life. And it's not like this big, heavy thing that I have to carry around. Or my former student who leaves one muffin on a doorstep. Or my friend who left me a tray of squares. It doesn't have to be this huge, massive thing that people do. But your thing could be to that person, you know, making them feel seen and heard is huge. You know, it's very isolating these days. Your act of kindness is a bridge builder, is a connector, makes someone feel valued and seen. It's absolutely, there's no way to quantify it. As Robbie said, there is no way to quantify that act of kindness.
Connection is a word that really resonates throughout the book. And you mentioned earlier that it is about hand-holding, both figuratively and literally. And I'd like to talk about the story of literal hand-holding because it was just so beautiful, and it was lovely that you would share that. I know you don't want to give everything away.
It's okay.
But if you could tell us that story about your dad, that would be beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I knew when I was going to do this book, I knew the ending would be this ending with my dad. Which is a very private moment to share, and I'm gonna do my absolute best to get through telling it. But when my dad was very sick the year before he died, which would have been, he died in 2006, so this happened in 2005, my dad required an emergency quadruple bypass open heart surgery. And, you know, his health had been failing, so we end up in the QE2, and we'd been in and out of the ER many, many times in that last year of his life, me taking him in there as his only caregiver. I don't have siblings. And so he has the emergency heart surgery, and I sit at the hospital for the entire thing, and it was like about 6 hours long, and you're waiting. And I go down into one of the things that was lovely about it too is I went down to the chapel at the QE2 in Halifax to pray, and people who've been in the hospital will know where that is. And I was just a complete mess, and I mean heavily sobbing in the back row. And this woman got up, an older lady came over, and she just sat down beside me and said, you know, are you okay? And I said, no, my dad's upstairs right now undergoing emergency heart surgery. And she sat with me. I don't know what she said. It didn't matter to me what she said. Mm-hmm. What she did is she came over just to be like, you're not alone. And then she left me to have my privacy, and I've never forgotten her act of kindness. So you know, maybe she'll hear this, who knows? But mm-hmm. All I know is that she, you know, you might look like an outwardly strong person, which I am, but that doesn't mean we all don't need our own hand holding.
We've all got a soft core.
We do. And so fast forward to after the operation was successful. I'm very lucky that it was because it gave me another year with Dad. He is in the cardiovascular intensive care unit, and he had this nurse, and I'm very, very big into supporting nurses. I have friends who are nurses, my daughter who has friends who are nurses. I just have hold them in such high esteem, our nurses. We don't pay them enough. Anybody from government listening, advocating for nurses? But honestly, he had this one cardiovascular care nurse at the QE2 who's now in Cape Breton. And it was the way she cared for him. Of course, he had many, many medical professionals, and I thank them all in the book. I really do. But this one nurse from Cape Breton stuck out in Dad's mind, and that's for three reasons. Well, two main ones. One, that she was from Cape Breton because my dad's father, William Bill Landry, is from River Bourgeois. So anything to do with Cape Breton, it stuck. You know, keep in mind, Dad's coming out of heavy, heavy anesthesia, having gone through this really, really life-saving surgery. And so he doesn't remember a lot, but he remembers that she has dark hair. He remembers that she's from Cape Breton because of his paternal connection to Cape Breton. And then he remembers the third and most important thing, and the reason why it closes the book is that in coming out of that heavy anesthetic, and it's scary, and you're alone, and I could only be with him little bits of time. This nurse from Cape Breton, her name's Evie, sat with my dad bedside. Again, full circle from me, sitting bedside with Dad as a kid reading Richard Scarry as a little girl. Now the tables have turned to this nurse sitting bedside with Dad holding his hand. And that powerful empathy and the simple act of literal hand holding to this man. My dad was a hero. He was a firefighter. He was a Medal of Bravery winner. He was in incredibly fit shape when he was younger. That this person could have such vulnerability near the end of their life to realize the power of the act of hand-holding is just so beautiful that I had to meet that nurse and look her in the eye and tell her what that meant to him and what it still means to me. So we all need hand-holding. And that act, that final scene, closes the book. And I have no trouble telling you or anyone about Evie McKay from Inverness, Cape Breton, because she is an angel on earth.
I just said the other day, I think there's more good people per capita in Cape Breton than anywhere in the world.
And they make great tea biscuits. My nanny was from Shetty Camp.
That explains it all.
Yes.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to take it to one more friend because, of course, Janice and I talked about this in the intro, but Janice and I worked together for a long time, have known each other since we were in our early 20s, and we share a lot of friends in common. And one of our friends, Yvonne Colbert, actually used to co-host with me for a while, and we were on the same show and worked so long together. And she's a wonderful human. Talk about kindness. But when her husband, Rick Howe, died a couple of years ago now, he did something really beautiful on his way out that is featured in your book. And I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about that because I think this will inspire people. For people in the Halifax area, they would know the name Rick Howe because he had a talk show for a long time and was on radio in other ways before that. But this particular act of kindness that went beyond the grave was really spectacular.
It was. And I think that one of the things that listeners here need to know is that Rick really was of the people. He really fought for the little guy. He could appear to be super gruff. He would laugh at me telling this right now. He wasn't. He was a true blue softy, very highly intelligent. I used to say to Yvonne that in broadcasting and in radio and television, our friend Steve Murphy, it's so good live, so good off the cuff, one of the best of the best. And Rick was the best of the best for doing that sort of thing in radio. These two guys are the absolute pinnacle. If you've worked alongside them, it looks easy. It's not easy. And Rick made it just look so effortless. But he really fought for the little guy. And when he passed, he had his celebration of life. And we just finished in January of 2025, the first year full rotation since Rick passed. So we're just kind of coming into year two, early year two, mid-year two. He had the celebration of life at the Lord Nelson Suites in Halifax up by the Public Gardens. And he invited all of his friends and family to come, but he also invited listeners to come to a celebration of life. So it was open. And first of all, that act of kindness, I think there was respect there there on both sides of the microphone. He had his own people, but he really respected his own listeners. And I was at the event, and there were listeners there, and you could tell watching them interact that they were very honored to be at Rick's. They felt compelled to be there. And so what Rick asked people to do for his final act of kindness is on the day of his event, his memorial, they had these tables draped in white linen and these baskets, and he asked people if they could, obviously everyone can't afford to do this, to bring little bouquets of flowers, things that you might get at the grocery store, nothing super fancy, a little bouquet of flowers, and to pop them in these lovely baskets on the tables. And these were not for Rick, nor were they for his family or loved ones. They would be, after the event, delivered to several nonprofits in the city, including Shelter Nova Scotia, others, that for a segment of society of people that don't rarely get flowers.
Like some elderly people in seniors' homes.
Exactly. People living rough, women fleeing violence with their children. So these flowers were hand-delivered by the Howe and Colbert families after the event. So not only are these families in deep grief, but now we're actually going to take that and put it aside, and we're going to turn it into something beautiful by doing these acts of kindness, by delivering all these flowers to these different nonprofits as Rick's final act. And in it, they had these little notes that said, basically the last line of Rick's note to people was, "You matter." And these nonprofits that received the flowers were just absolutely blown away. And one of them cited him as a community champion for never forgetting people. Even in death, he was still spreading joy and goodwill and acts of kindness. And that really has spurred me. I'm hoping that when people read this, it's in the prologue, he appears in my prologue, that they stop and think about their own life. And when they pass, what good can they do? What can you do with your own power? It doesn't have to be huge, these huge acts. It can be small, but by asking people to do that, you've left this indelible legacy in this body of work that went on for 50 years. This is his final act, and it's not about him, and it's not about his own family, and his family came first. Trust me, I know that, but that speaks volumes, the type of man that he was. He was of the people and for the people, and his last act underlined that.
Well, maybe it wasn't his last act because, you said earlier, sometimes we have the idea to do something kind, but it's really about acting on it and going through with it. Well, I'm just reaching off mic here for a second. I brought a yoga bag here today. I'm going to commentate while I'm doing this because there's something in the yoga bag for you.
What?
And the idea popped into my head. I believe sometimes when ideas pop into my head, they are given to me by people who are no longer here. So please open the yoga bag.
Okay.
Good. The zipper sounds good on the mic. Good.
Okay. Zipper. It's a nice bag. I thought it was like a pool cue and we were going to go to a pool table and, what are you doing? Oh, you're so sweet.
So I think these are congratulatory flowers
you're
for
so
you
sweet.
On this brilliant new book about kindness that you're gifting the world.
Oh, you were so
and
sweet.
The flowers are from Rick and maybe a little bit from me because I followed through on the idea he put in my head.
Oh, you are this is just so beautiful. I don't know what to say. You're just one of the kindest people. You really, truly are. And the thing is, you're using your own gifts for storytelling, of which you have many, to try to shine light into the world. And, you don't have to do that, Nancy, at this stage of your career. I know that. But you continue to spread light with what you do in many acts that people don't know about. And so, for example, with our late friend Audrey Parker, you were really one of the key people that was there for Aud in the very last weeks and months of her life. And I mean in a big, big way. And I was also Audrey's close friend, but you were next level for her. And, we really appreciate that. You made her last few weeks and days extra special. The way you showed up for her was so beautiful and humbling that, when I put these flowers into a vase, I'll think of both of you. So Show your chocolate though, because I
Well,
brought you something too.
I was just going to say. So when you gave me this beforehand, this is a beautiful little milk chocolate shoes. Janice loves handbags and heels
From
and
Harrods.
lipstick.
I brought
And
that
it's from Harrods.
It's from Harrods in London, and I've only brought a few pieces of chocolate back. So you've always been so fashionable, and I just love that makes me think of Audrey, by the way, that purse with the little chocolate shoes in it. So
She loved her handbags.
She
And let's
certainly
leave
did.
with her quote, because it perfectly represents your book. Be kind because you can.
that's right. And when people show you who they are, believe them. And you do that. You're showing people who you are, and we believe it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for this.
Just beautiful.
Thanks so much for listening to the Canadian Love Map. This podcast is presented and made possible by Charm Diamond Centers. It's hosted by me, Nancy Regan, and is produced and distributed by Podstarter. We love sharing love stories of all kinds, and that could include yours. So do you or someone you know have an uplifting tale to tell? Reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram using @CanadianLoveMap or email producer@podstarter.io. We'll be back next week with another love story to add to the map.